Welcome to a gentler time, a place where the lamps burn low, and the ocean hums softly beyond the window pane. Close your eyes, let the hush of night settle over you. Listen, the wind is whispering through the elm trees, and far away, a boy's laughter drifts like an echo of summer tonight. We travel to the harbour town of Rivermouth, where the tides roll in slow, and a restless boy begins his story, a story of mischief, of growing up, and of finding the quiet goodness that hides inside every wild heart. Breathe softly, let the rhythm of the sea carry you there, let the story begin. Long ago, before the world learned to move too fast, there was a boy named Tom Bailey. He was neither wicked nor saintly, simply a boy, with salt in his hair and a spark of mischief in his soul. Tom came from a city where the streets were loud and bright, but his heart belonged to open skies and adventure. One summer, when the heat shimmered off the cobblestones, his mother sent him to live with his grandfather in the sleepy harbour town of Rivermouth, a place where the air always smelled faintly of salt and pine, and the sea whispered stories to anyone who would listen. The journey there felt endless. The train clattered through valleys and meadows, past grazing cows and distant church steeples. Tom pressed his face to the window, watching the world roll by, his imagination already painting the town with adventure, pirate ships in the bay, hidden caves under the cliffs, and ghosts in the fog. When he finally arrived, the world felt bigger than he'd imagined. The docks stretched long and wooden into the silver water, and the gulls wheeled overhead like scraps of paper in the wind. Old sailors leaned against barrels, their voices rough and kind, and there, standing by the carriage, was his grandfather, stern, tall, and smiling behind a white beard. "Welcome to Rivermouth, Tom," he said, and just like that, the adventure began. The house was old, a little crooked from the years, but it stood proud beside the water, its shutters clattering softly in the wind. Tom's room faced the harbour. At night, he could hear the waves kissing the shore, and the far-off bells from ships drifting in the fog. Sometimes he thought the sea was talking to him, not in words, but in feelings. Freedom, wonder, a longing he couldn't name. His grandfather was kind but firm, a man who believed in good manners, hard work, and quiet reflection before bedtime. Tom tried, truly he did, but his heart was a compass, always pointing toward mischief. One evening, he found an old wooden boat tied behind the garden fence. It was small, paint flaking, a single oar resting across its sea, and though he'd been told to stay near the house, Tom untied it anyway. The river was calm that night, the surface smooth as glass. Fireflies hovered above the reeds, their light winking like tiny lanterns. Tom rowed slowly, each stroke echoing softly in the silence. He felt brave, like the captain of his own secret ship. Then the current caught him, the boat spun gently, and his heart thudded with sudden fear. He tried to row back, but the oar slipped, the boat turned sideways, and for one breathless moment he thought he'd drift into the dark forever. But the river was kind. A fisherman, hearing the splash, rowed out and caught the runaway boat. He pulled Tom aboard, his laughter warm and low. First time on the river, a lad. Tom nodded, cheeks burning. The man only smiled. Every sailor learns by getting wet once. And under the quiet stars, Tom realized something, that courage was not about never being afraid, but about learning from the fear itself. The next morning, grandfather didn't scold him. He only said, "The sea is a fine teacher, Tom, but she doesn't forgive carelessness. Respect her, and she be your friend." Tom nodded quietly. For the first time, his restless heart felt still. That night, As the waves whispered against the shore, Tom looked out his window and smiled at the faint shimmer of moonlight on the water. He didn't yet know it, but this small town, these small adventures, would shape him forever, turning the wildness in him into something wiser, something good. Morning came to Rivermouth with the cry of gulls and the soft creak of harbor ropes. The fog lifted slowly, curling away from the river like breath from a dream. Tom Bailey stood by the window, buttoning his jacket, watching the sun spill over the masts and rooftops of the town. Today was his first day at school. He could already hear the bell, sharp and clear, cutting through the quiet streets. It sounded less like a welcome and more like a warning. The schoolhouse stood near the edge of the square, a low brick building with white shutters and a flag that danced lazily in the wind. Inside, desks lined up in perfect rows, and the scent of chalk and pine wood hung in the air. Tom hesitated at the doorway, his heart pounding in a rhythm only he could hear. He wasn't afraid exactly, only curious, and a little defiant. He was the new boy, the city boy, and the others would know it right away. The schoolmaster was a man named Mr. Grimshaw, a tall figure with silver hair and a voice as steady as the tide. He wore a long black coat and carried a ruler not as a weapon, but as a conductor's baton, guiding his small orchestra of restless boys. "Your name?" he asked. "Tom Bailey, sir," Tom replied, his voice firm. The master nodded. "From Boston, I hear. We'll make a Rivermouth lad of you yet." Tom found his seat beside a thin, bright-eyed boy named Binny Wallace, who offered him half a piece of toffee and a grin that said, "We'll be friends." The morning passed in a blur of lessons: arithmetic, Latin, geography, the usual symphony of scratching pens and creaking benches. Tom tried to pay attention, but his gaze kept drifting toward the open window, where the river gleamed under the sun like a mirror. Outside was freedom, inside was order, and Tom, even then, was never meant for cages. When the bell rang for recess, the boys spilled into the yard like wind through tall grass. Shouts and laughter filled the air, and Tom felt something stir, that familiar wild spark, that restless curiosity that no rule could smother. He noticed the schoolmaster's hat resting neatly on the fence post near the door, a black hat, tall, perfect, a symbol of authority, and right beside it. The afternoon breeze whispered mischief in Tom's ear. "Bet you won't," Binny dared softly. Tom smiled. Without thinking twice, he slipped a string from his pocket, the one tied to his kite last summer, looped it around the brim, and with one smooth tug, the hat lifted into the air like a bird taking flight. The boys gasped, then burst into laughter. Up it went, spinning, a black dot dancing against the pale sky. Even Tom's heart soared with it. Then came the silence, and the slow, deliberate steps of Mr. Grimshaw behind him. Tom froze. The ruler tapped once against the ground. "Mr. Bailey," said the calm, even voice, "would you care to explain why my hat has taken an interest in astronomy?" The laughter died instantly. Tom swallowed hard, then muttered, "It wanted to see the sky, sir." A pause. Then, to everyone's shock, the master's stern mouth twitched. 5 lines from Virgil, Mr. Bailey, and "Well done" on the knot. The class erupted again, not with mockery, but with awe. From that day forward, Tom Bailey was one of them. Binny and Tom became inseparable. They built rafts from stolen planks, fished for trout with bent pins, and invented secret codes only they understood. Binny was quieter, more thoughtful, the kind of boy who noticed the shape of clouds, who could find beauty in a puddle. Tom was the storm, Binny the calm that followed. Together, They balanced each other, and Rivermouth became their playground. The docks, the woods, the winding alleys behind the church. They were not bad boys, not really, just curious ones, boys who wanted to understand the world by touching it, climbing it, sometimes breaking it a little, to see what it was made of. That night, Tom sat by the window again, listening to the distant sea. He thought of the day, the laughter, the thrill, the almost trouble, and for the first time, he felt something new, belonging. The town no longer felt strange. The stars seemed closer, and the rhythm of the river matched his own heartbeat in that quiet. He didn't yet know how many more adventures awaited him, how many mistakes, lessons, and small acts of courage would shape him. But for now, it was enough to simply be a boy in a town that was beginning to feel like home. The air in Rivermouth had grown softer now, touched with the scent of ripening fruit and warm earth. The days stretched lazily, filled with the hum of bees and the murmur of the tide beyond the docks. Tom Bailey had grown comfortable in this quiet town, a boy no longer new, yet still full of wonder, and always looking for something to stir the stillness. It began, as most of Tom's adventures did, with an idea whispered on a summer afternoon. He and Binny Wallace were walking home from school, their books swinging in their hands when they passed Farmer Blake's orchard. The trees were heavy with apples, glowing red and gold in the fading light. Behind the fence, the fruit shimmered like treasure. Tom stopped. He stared through the slats, his heart thudding with that wild mixture of temptation and curiosity. "Do you see them?" he said softly. "They look like they're waiting for us." Binny frowned, though his eyes shone. "Tom, you know the farmer doesn't like anyone near his orchard." Tom grinned, that mischievous, lopsided grin that always came before trouble. "That's why it'll be fun." At dusk, when the crickets began their song and the last rays of sunlight bled over the fields, the boys crept back. The world had grown hushed and secretive. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. They climbed the fence quietly, their hearts racing, their hands trembling, not with fear but excitement. The apples gleamed above them, close enough to touch, yet heavy with forbidden sweetness. Tom reached up first. The branch bent under his hand, rustling softly. One apple dropped into the grass, another followed, rolling toward Binny's foot. The sound felt too loud in the quiet. They both froze, listening. Only the whisper of leaves answered back. Tom laughed under his breath. "See, easy." He filled his cap with the fruit, each one cool and round, their scent filling the air. For a moment, it felt like a harmless victory to boys against the rules of grown-ups, stealing only a taste of summer dot. Then came the bark, deep, sharp, sudden. A dog's growl tore through the night. In an instant, the orchard erupted with noise. The pounding of paws, the shout of a man's voice from the farmhouse. "Who's there?" Tom dropped the cap, apples spilling and tumbling through the grass. "Run!" he hissed. They leaped the fence, just as the dog reached it, its teeth flashing in the dark. Binny stumbled, caught his breath, and laughed, that trembling, breathless laugh that comes when danger turns thrilling. They ran through the field, over the hill, down toward the river, until their legs burned and their lungs felt like fire. When they finally stopped, the town lay quiet below them, wrapped in moonlight. Tom looked at Binny, his hair tousled, his knees scraped, his eyes alive. "We did it," he whispered. Binny shook his head, smiling despite himself. "We didn't even get one apple." Tom lay back on the grass, staring up at the stars. "Maybe not," he said, "but we got something better." The river murmured softly nearby, and for a while, they just listened to boys lying under the summer sky, their laughter fading into the sound of crickets. To anyone else, it was a foolish act. a bit of mischief, to be scolded in the morning. But to them, it was freedom, the kind that only childhood knows, where every mistake is a story and every adventure ends in laughter. Later, when Tom crept back into his room, the moonlight still danced on his hands. He thought of the orchard, the chase, the taste of air in his lungs. He knew his grandfather would find out. He always did. But for now, Tom smiled into the quiet, his heart still beating fast. He didn't steal apples for hunger, or even for the thrill of it. Not really. What he wanted was the feeling of being alive, of testing the world's edges and finding that it was wide enough for him to run free. Down by the river, the tide whispered softly against the stones, as if agreeing with him, and somewhere in the distance, the night carried the faint scent of apples still hanging on the trees, waiting for morning. Days in Rivermouth began to blend into one another, a rhythm of sun and wind, of lessons and laughter, of afternoons that stretched lazily into golden evening. Tom Bailey had settled into the town's heartbeat, a part of its mischief, its kindness, its quiet adventures. He and Binny Wallace were almost never apart. Their friendship was stitched together from shared secrets, muddy shoes, and promises whispered under the elm tree by the riverbank. Every boy in Rivermouth knew Tom's grin before he spoke. It was the grin of someone who was always thinking of something daring, something half wrong but fully alive. And though he could be reckless, there was a warmth to him, a spark that made even the most cautious boys follow wherever he led. But friendship, like the tide, isn't always calm. It began on a windy afternoon at the edge of the schoolyard. The boys had gathered near the fence, a scuffed leather ball rolling between their feet. There was laughter and shouting, the kind that fills the air with noise and sunlight. Tom kicked the ball hard, sending it spinning down the road. A boy named Jack Harris ran after it, tripped, and fell into the dust. When he got up, his pride hurt more than his knees. "You did that on purpose," Jack shouted. His face was flushed, his eyes sharp. Tom shook his head, still smiling. "Didn't mean to. You're just slow." The other boys laughed, and that laughter, small as it was, turned the air heavier. Jack stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Say that again." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then Tom dropped his books, and before he could think better of it, the two boys were on the ground, a blur of dust, shouts, and tangled arms. The fight was clumsy, wild, and over almost as soon as it began. Mr. Grimshaw's voice cut through the air like a bell, and the crowd scattered. When Tom stood up, his lip was bleeding, his shirt torn. Jack's face was streaked with dirt, his pride even more bruised. The master said little, only that fighting was for fools, and both would stay after school to think about what they'd gained. That evening, Tom sat in silence beside Binny on the walk home. The street smelled of bread baking, the sea somewhere beyond it, calm and blue. Binny spoke first. "You didn't have to fight him." Tom kicked a pebble down the road. "He called me slow first." Binny gave him that look, the one that made Tom feel like maybe he wasn't as clever as he thought. "You don't always have to win," Binny said softly. "Sometimes it's better to walk away." Tom didn't answer. He wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Deep down, he knew his friend was right. The memory of Jack's angry face followed him all night, like a shadow in his thoughts. A few days later, the chance for peace came in the most unexpected way. It was raining, one of those steady summer rains that turns the dirt roads to mirrors and makes the world smell clean. Tom was walking home when he saw Jack ahead, struggling to lift a basket that had fallen from a cart. The apples inside had rolled into the gutter, shining like coins in the wet dot. Without thinking, Tom ran forward and helped gather them. Neither spoke at first. The rain whispered round them, soft as forgiveness. When the last apple was back in the basket, Jack nodded. "Thanks," he muttered. Tom shrugged, trying to sound casual. "You'd have done the same." For a moment, Jack's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough. They walked together a while, the silence between them no longer sharp, and when they reached the crossroads, Jack raised his hand in a small wave before heading home. That night, Tom sat by the window again, the lamplight warm on his face. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the river gleamed faintly under the moon. He thought of Binny's words, that walking away could be braver than standing your ground. It wasn't easy to admit, but maybe kindness was a kind of courage to dot in the quiet. Tom realized that being a bad boy didn't mean being cruel or fearless or wild. It meant being human, full of mistakes, laughter, lessons, and the slow, beautiful work of growing up. He rested his head against the cool window pane, the sound of the sea steady and calm, and felt the day drift from his heart like a leaf floating down the river. Winter crept slowly into Rivermouth. It began with small things, the river freezing at its edges, the morning frost painting white lace on every window pane, the air turning sharp enough to sting your nose. The boats at the dock slept beneath a thin layer of ice, and the town's chimneys exhaled soft clouds that drifted like ghosts above the rooftops. Tom Bailey loved it all. The cold made him feel alive, the crunch of snow beneath his boots, the sparkle of icicles hanging from the eaves, the quiet hush that came over the streets when the world turned white. School felt smaller in winter, its walls closer, the lessons longer, and the boys more restless. One grey afternoon, the first true storm came. The sky hung heavy with clouds, and the wind blew wild across the harbour. The townsfolk hurried home, wrapping scarves over their faces, but Tom and Binny stood at the window of the schoolroom, watching with wide eyes as the snow began to fall, soft at first, then thick and fast, covering the streets and trees and rooftops in silence. By the time the final bell rang, the world outside had disappeared. The road to the square was gone, the fences buried, the wind howling like something alive. Mr. Grimshaw told them to go straight home. No wandering, no playing. The boys promised, but promises are easily lost in a snowstorm. The moment they stepped outside, the air felt like magic. The snowflakes spun around them like tiny stars. Tom threw the first snowball, hitting Binny square in the shoulder. Binny laughed, ducked, and fired one back. Soon the yard was alive with flying white bursts and echoing laughter. The cold didn't matter. The world was theirs again. But when they finally stopped to catch their breath, they realized how deep the snow had grown. The streets were nearly gone, the signs buried, the sky a blur of grey and white. Tom squinted through the swirling flakes. "Which way is home?" he asked. Binny looked around, uncertain. The storm had changed everything, every path, every sound. They started walking, leaning into the wind, their feet sinking deep. The air howled in their ears, and the snow stung their faces. Soon the laughter faded, replaced by the steady sound of their own breathing and the endless whisper of falling snow. Houses vanished into mist, fences disappeared, and the world became a white sea. Tom tried to be brave. "We'll find the main road," he said. "Just keep walking." But as the wind grew stronger, even his voice sounded small. They turned down a lane that should have led toward the river, but it led instead into open fields, now hidden under a blanket of snow. The drifts rose higher, past their knees, past their legs. Binny stumbled once, then again, his hands trembling. Tom caught his arm. "Don't stop," he said. "We're almost there." But he didn't know if that was true. He could barely feel his fingers. The storm seemed endless. Then, through the blur of white, they saw a faint yellow light, a flicker in the distance, like a candle calling from far away. They stumbled toward it, slipping, falling, getting up again. The light grew brighter, steadier. When they reached it, they found a small cottage tucked behind the trees. Smoke curling from the chimney. A woman opened the door, startled to see two snow-covered boys on her step. "Mercy," she cried. "Come in, quick." She wrapped them in blankets, set them by the fire, and pressed warm mugs into their numb hands. The heat felt like sunlight. The storm raged outside, battering the windows, but inside, the fire crackled and popped, and safety settled around them like a lullaby. Hours passed before the wind began to calm. The woman sent word to the town, and by evening, Tom's grandfather arrived with a lantern in hand, his face pale with worry. He pulled Tom into his arms, the relief in his voice breaking the quiet. "You foolish boy," he whispered. "You've aged me 10 years in one day." Back home, as the fire burned low and the house sighed with warmth, Tom lay awake in bed, listening to the last flakes drift against the window. The fear had passed, but something had changed inside him. He had looked into the face of winter, the same wildness that had once thrilled him, and learned how easily it could turn cruel. In the days that followed, the snow began to melt, dripping from the roofs like slow music. The streets reappeared, the river began to move again, and the town returned to its rhythm. But Tom carried the storm inside him, not as fear, but as memory, a reminder that adventure and danger were brothers born of the same wind. Sometimes, on cold nights when the wind howled through the chimney, he would remember that yellow light glowing in the distance, the beacon that had led him home through the dark. And though he never said it aloud, a quiet gratitude lived in his heart, like the warmth of that cottage fire that had once saved two foolish boys from the storm. The snow melted slowly that year, giving way to wet streets and fog that clung to the river like a ghost that had lost its way home. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and woods. For Tom Bailey and Binny Wallace, it was the kind of weather that made the world feel mysterious, half dream, half dare. It was on one of those misty evenings that the story began, the night of the haunted house. Every town has one. In Rivermouth, it stood on the edge of the old cemetery road, a grey, leaning house with shutters that creaked when the wind passed. The townsfolk said no one had lived there for 20 years. Some swore they'd seen lights flicker in the windows on moonless nights. Others said they'd heard piano music drifting through the fog, faint, broken notes that didn't belong to any living hands. To boys like Tom, that was an invitation. He and Binny first passed it on their way back from fishing one dusk. The house looked asleep, half swallowed by ivy, its chimney slanted, the porch sagging like a tired sigh. A broken weather vane turned slowly on the roof, squealing as it moved. Tom stopped at the gate. "They say old Captain Nutter's ghost walks in there," he whispered. Binny shivered, though he tried to laugh. "And you believe that?" Tom grinned. "Only one way to find out." The plan was made before either had time to reconsider. They would sneak out after supper, just for a look, not to go inside, they promised, just to see. That night, the moon rose behind a veil of cloud. The air smelled of the sea, and the streets glimmered faintly with frost. Tom's heart thumped as he climbed out his window, boots hitting the ground softly. Binny was waiting by the corner, his face pale but determined. Neither spoke as they walked down the empty road, their breath rising like smoke. The house came into view slowly, its shape melting out of the fog. The gate hung from one hinge, the path overgrown with weeds. The front door was half open, moving just enough to groan against its frame. Tom stopped, his pulse quickening. "We said we'd just look," Binny reminded him, his voice a whisper. "I know," Tom said, and stepped onto the porch anyway. The boards creaked under his feet. The sound was so loud in the silence that Binny winced. They stood there, listening. Nothing, only the faint ticking of something inside. Like a clock that had forgotten how to keep time. Tom pushed the door a little wider. It swung with a low moan. The air that came out smelled of dust and old rain. A staircase rose in front of them, its banister carved with vines that had turned grey with age. In the dim light, the whole place seemed to breathe, the slow, tired breathing of an old memory that refused to fade. Binny caught Tom's sleeve. "Let's go," he whispered, but Tom had already taken one step inside. The floorboards groaned. The wind hissed through a crack in the wall. Somewhere above, a door slammed, sudden and sharp. Both boys froze. Binny's hand tightened around Tom's arm. "It's just the wind," Tom said, though his voice sounded smaller now. They crept through the front room. The wallpaper peeled in long, curling strips. A portrait hung crooked on the wall, a man with cold eyes and a faint smile, his paint cracked like dried leaves. Beneath it stood a piano, its lid warped, keys yellowed with time. Tom touched one gently, and it gave a faint hollow note that echoed through the room like a sigh. Then another sound, not from the piano, but from the stairs. A slow, measured step, then another dot. The boys turned, hearts hammering. The air seemed to thicken, the shadows deepening around them. A faint glow appeared at the top of the staircase, not bright, but pulsing softly, like a lantern seen through water. "Binny," whispered Tom. For a moment, neither moved. Then instinct or fear took over. They ran, out the door, through the weeds, past the gate that clanged behind them. They didn't stop until they reached the riverbank, their lungs burning, their hands scraped, their laughter wild with relief and terror. They sat there, catching their breath, the moonlight washing their faces pale. Tom's voice came first, shaky but thrilled. "We saw something." Binny shook his head. "We saw the light from a lantern, maybe someone walking." Tom smiled, his eyes still wide. "Then why didn't we hear footsteps outside?" Binny didn't answer. The river murmured beside them, calm and unbothered. Above, the stars blinked faintly through the fog, as if pretending not to notice two foolish boys and their midnight courage. When Tom climbed into bed that night, he left the lamp burning. He told himself it was only because he planned to read a little before sleeping, but his book lay untouched on the nightstand. The wind brushed softly against the window, and for a moment, he thought, he heard faint piano notes drifting from far away, broken, uncertain, like a song that couldn't quite remember its tune. He smiled despite himself, pulled the blanket close, and whispered into the dark, "Good night, Captain Nutter." And somewhere, deep in the folds of Rivermouth's fog, an old house creaked, as if answering back. Summer returned to Rivermouth like a long-forgotten friend, bringing warmth and noise back to the sleepy harbour town. The air shimmered with the scent of clover and salt, and the world seemed wide again, full of laughter, colour, and mischief waiting to happen. Tom Bailey was older now by a year, but not wiser by much. The quiet lessons of winter had faded into the bright pulse of adventure. It was on one of those golden mornings that the posters began to appear red and blue, pasted to every wall and gate. The Great Morrison & Co. Travelling Circus, one day only, wonders from the world. Tom spotted the first one outside the bakery. A lion with a golden mane roared from the page, and a woman in glittering silver stood beside him, smiling as if she had tamed the sun. Beneath them, the words acrobats, jugglers, horses, and marvels from every land danced across the paper. Tom stood frozen, heart thudding. A circus, he whispered, a real one. By afternoon, it was all anyone in Rivermouth could talk about. The adults complained about the noise and nonsense it would bring. The boys couldn't stop imagining it. The drums, the smell of sawdust, the glittering ring under the big top. Tickets cost 25 cents. To a grown man, a trifle. To a boy, an impossible treasure. Tom and Binny spent 3 days plotting. They collected bottles for return, offered to run errands, even tried to sell seashells polished smooth by the tide. But the coins they gathered weren't enough. On the night before the circus came, they sat beneath the elm tree by the river, staring at the stars through the branches. "There's got to be a way," Tom murmured. Binny sighed. "We could just not go." Tom looked at him as if he'd suggested they stop breathing. "Not go?" He shook his head. "We'll find a way in somehow." The next morning, the town awoke to drums, real drums, deep and thrilling, rolling through the streets like thunder. People gathered in doorways as the parade passed, wagons painted in red and gold, horses in plumes, clowns tossing flowers, and behind them all, the great striped tent rising near the riverbank. The air smelled of popcorn and sawdust and possibility. Tom and Binny followed the procession, trying to look invisible among the crowd. When the ticket taker set up by the gate, they hung back, watching, waiting. Tom's eyes searched the tent until they found it, a loose flap at the far side, where a crate leaned just close enough to climb. It wasn't courage that made him do it. Not really. It was the same wild impulse that had led him into the river, into the orchard, into every beautiful bit of trouble before. He looked at Binny. "Ready?" Binny hesitated only a second, then nodded. Together, they slipped behind the wagons, climbed the crate, and ducked through the canvas. Inside was another world. The tent was dim and golden, filled with the smell of hay and music. Ropes hung like spider webs above, and the center ring shimmered with sawdust and light. A man on a tall horse rode past, the plume of his hat brushing the air. Above them, a girl swung from a rope, her white dress floating like a bird's wing. Tom forgot to breathe, Binny whispered. "It's like flying." They hid behind a barrel, watching the wonders unfold. Clowns tumbled, jugglers spun fire. The lion roared so deep it shook the ground beneath their feet. Every sound, every shimmer of light filled their hearts to bursting. For that hour, they weren't boys in a small town. They were travelers in a dream. Then, just as the final act began, the great rope walker stepping onto his line. High above the crowd, a heavy hand landed on Tom's shoulder. "Well, well," said a gruff voice. "What have we here?" The tent light caught the brass buttons of a constable's coat. Tom froze, his throat dry. Binny tried to speak, but couldn't. The man's grip tightened. "No tickets, I'd wager." He marched them outside, their heads hung low, the noise of the circus fading behind them. The constable sighed. Not angry, only tired. "You boys," he said, "always finding trouble before it finds you." He let them go with a warning and a look that was half amusement, half pity. They walked home in silence, their shoes kicking at the dust. The world seemed quieter now, the music of the circus echoing faintly behind them. When they reached the river, Tom stopped. The reflection of the tent shimmered on the water, its lights like tiny stars trembling in the current. "We saw it," he said softly. "Even if we didn't belong there, we saw it." Binny nodded. "And maybe that's enough." That night, long after the last drumbeat faded, Tom lay awake, listening to the crickets. He could still see the girl on the rope, still feel the warmth of the lights, still smell the sawdust and spice. He smiled in the dark, not with regret, but with something quieter, the memory of wonder. And as he drifted toward sleep, he thought that maybe life itself was a kind of circus, full of danger and beauty, laughter and mistakes, and maybe the trick was not in avoiding the fall, but in daring to climb the rope anyway. The summer wind turned cool, and the sea changed its color from bright glass to steel. For weeks, the sky had stayed pale and clear, the waves gentle against the pier. But one morning the horizon looked strange, a bruise of grey spreading slowly across the light. The fishermen at the harbour spoke in low voices, tying down their sails, glancing often toward the east. Even Tom Bailey, who had never feared the water, felt something uneasy in the air. He had always loved the sea. It was his greatest playground, his confidant. On still evenings he would sit at the edge of the wharf with Binny, tossing pebbles into the tide, imagining ships that sailed to faraway lands. But that morning, the sea did not feel like a friend. It heaved with restless breath, and the gulls flew low and silent. Tom's grandfather had warned him. "Storm coming," he said, tightening the shutters. "Stay away from the docks." Tom promised, half-heartedly, as boys do. He only wanted to look, just to see the sky change. By noon, the wind had risen. The air smelled of salt and rain, sharp enough to bite. Tom and Binny stood on the ridge above the harbour, watching the waves swell against the rocks. Out beyond the breakwater, a small fishing boat struggled against the current, its white sail snapping like torn cloth. Through the spray they could just make out two figures, old Captain Dyer and his son, fighting to bring the boat home. "They'll never make it," Binny whispered. Tom's heart hammered. He could see the boat turning sideways, the masts shuddering. Every instinct in him screamed to do something. Without thinking, he ran down the hill toward the pier, the wind slapping at his face. Binny shouted after him, but his voice vanished in the roar. The storm hit all at once, a curtain of rain, thick and cold, drenching everything in seconds. The harbour was chaos, ropes snapping, crates rolling, men shouting. Tom reached the edge of the wharf, gripping the post to keep from slipping. The boat was close now, rising and falling with each monstrous wave. He could see Captain Dyer clinging to the tiller, his son struggling with the line. Tom scanned the dock until he saw it, an old coil of rope, half buried in a barrel. He seized it, tied it clumsily around his waist, and threw the other end to a man beside him. "Hold tight," he yelled, his voice nearly lost in the wind. Then, without another thought, he leaped into the freezing water. The shock stole his breath. The current grabbed him like a living thing, pulling hard. He kicked, fought, gasped. The boat loomed above him, its hull black against the grey sky. Hands reached down, Captain Dyer's, rough and strong. Somehow Tom grabbed hold, was dragged half in, half out of the churning sea. The boat lurched, slammed against the pier, and for a moment everything dissolved into water and noise and fear. Then hands again, voices, men pulling, shouting, and suddenly they were on the dock, coughing, trembling, soaked through. The storm screamed above them, but they were alive. Captain Dyer lay on the boards, gasping. When he saw Tom, he laughed, a deep, broken laugh, full of disbelief. "You foolhardy lad," he said, "you saved our skins." Tom could barely speak. His lips were blue, his arms heavy. Binny knelt beside him, eyes wide with both terror and awe. Around them, the men worked fast, tying boats, shouting over the gale, fighting to keep the harbour from tearing apart. By evening, The worst had passed. The clouds thinned, the sea settling into long, weary sighs. Tom sat wrapped in a blanket near the hearth at home, while his grandfather scolded and held him in the same breath. The old man's voice shook. "Reckless boy, brave boy." He didn't seem to know which dot outside. The storm moved away across the horizon, leaving the sky washed clean and full of stars. Tom watched the flicker of firelight on the wall, feeling the ache in his arms and the salt still on his skin. He had never been so tired, nor so alive. That night, as he lay in bed, he could still hear the sea breathing beyond the windows, slow, gentle again, as if whispering its thanks. And Tom understood something new, that courage was not loud, nor born from anger or pride, but from love, the quiet love that makes you leap before you even think why. He drifted into sleep to the rhythm of the waves, knowing the storm had changed him, though he couldn't yet tell how. The days after the storm felt strange, quieter somehow. The town went about its business, mending boats, sweeping away broken branches, talking softly in doorways as though afraid to disturb the stillness that followed the sea's anger. The air smelled clean, and the evenings were calm again. But there was a heaviness in it, something unspoken. For Tom Bailey, the world looked the same, but didn't feel the same. His friends called him a hero for what he had done at the pier, and for a while, he liked the sound of it. The men at the docks would nod when he passed, and Captain Dyer sent him a polished compass as a token of gratitude. But when the noise faded, when night fell and the house grew quiet, Tom felt something else beneath the pride, a strange weight, as if the sea had taken something from him when it gave back its peace. He started spending more time by the river alone, skipping stones, listening to the distant gulls. Binny noticed the change but didn't ask. They were growing older, just a little, but enough for silence to mean more than words. One evening, they walked to the edge of town where the old oak stood by the water. The wind had turned cool again, and the sunset burned in streaks of gold across the current. They talked about nothing: school, the boats, a new litter of kittens at the blacksmith's barn, until the light began to fade. "I wonder," Binny said after a long pause, "if you ever stop feeling small?" Tom turned to him. "What do you mean?" Binny shrugged, watching the reflection of the sky on the river. "Everything feels so big lately. The sea, the town, growing up, like we're just passing through it." Tom didn't answer. The thought stayed with him all the way home. That autumn, the first frost came early. The mornings turned white, and the air stung the cheeks. School began again, and the boys found themselves back in the rhythm of lessons and laughter. But one morning, Binny wasn't there. Mr. Grimshaw said he was ill. Nothing serious, a fever, he told them. But as the week went on, whispers moved through the town like wind through leaves. The fever was worse than they'd thought. Tom visited every day he was allowed. Binny's mother met him at the door, her face pale with worry. Inside, the room was warm and dim, the air thick with the scent of medicine and candle wax. Binny smiled when he saw him, though his voice was faint. "Hey, sailor," Tom said softly, trying to sound cheerful. "Hey yourself," Binny whispered. "How's the river?" "Still there," Tom said, "waiting for you." Binny's laugh was a ghost of itself, but it warmed the room. They talked a while, until Binny grew tired. Before Tom left, his friend reached for his hand. "Promise me," he said quietly, "you'll keep going, even when it gets hard. Promise you'll live enough for both of us." Tom nodded, though his throat hurt too much to speak. A few days later, the church bells rang, slow, heavy, the kind that make the air tremble. Tom stood outside, unable to go in, watching the door open and close as people entered. their faces solemn beneath the grey sky. He didn't cry, not then. He just walked past the square, past the harbour, until he reached the elm by the river. The water moved softly, as it always had. The same silver current that had carried their laughter 100 times before. Tom sat there until the stars came out, listening to the world breathe. When the tears finally came, they came quietly. That night, the wind picked up, rustling the shutters and the leaves outside his window. It sounded almost like a voice, faint, familiar. He thought of Binny's words. Keep going. In the morning, he went to the docks. The fishermen were already at work, calling to one another, ropes creaking, sails unfurling in the cold light. Tom stood at the edge, holding the compass Captain Dyer had given him. He turned it in his hand, watching the needle settle north, steady and sure. He tucked it into his pocket and smiled, not because he was happy, but because he finally understood. Growing up wasn't about becoming good or brave or wise all at once. It was about learning how to keep moving, even when the wind changed, even when someone you loved was no longer beside you. As the sun rose over Rivermouth, the water flashed gold, and for a moment Tom thought he saw two boys at the river's edge again, one tossing stones, one laughing beside him. The image shimmered, then faded into the light. But the warmth stayed, and in that still morning, Tom Bailey whispered, a promise to the sea, a promise to live, to remember, and to let time carry him forward, wherever the current would take him. Time in Rivermouth began to move differently after that winter. The days were the same streets, the same voices, the same slow tolling of the church bell at noon. But for Tom Bailey, something inside had shifted. He still laughed, still found trouble in small, harmless ways, but the mischief no longer burned as brightly. The world had deepened around him. He spent more time at the docks now, helping the fishermen mend their nets, listening to their stories about storms and lost years at sea. They treated him differently too, with a kind of quiet respect, not as a child anymore, but as someone who had seen the sea's face and understood its moods. Sometimes, when they spoke of Binny, their voices softened. Tom would smile and say, he'd have been the better sailor of us both, and they'd nod, knowing it was true. One afternoon in early spring, he walked along the riverbank, the same path where he and Binny had once raced the drifting leaves. The air was full of thawing earth and birdsong. The water shimmered like glass. He sat on the old fallen log and took out the compass, its brass worn smooth from his pocket. The needle still pointed north, steady and sure, just as it always had. He realized then that he had grown without noticing. His legs had stretched, his voice had changed, and his thoughts had grown heavier, not sad but thoughtful, shaped by the things he'd seen and lost. He didn't want to run away from the town anymore. He wanted to understand it, to be part of its quiet rhythm. He began helping his grandfather more, carrying wood, keeping the garden, reading aloud from the evening paper. The old man would nod as Tom read, his eyes crinkling with pride. You're your father's son," he said once, his voice soft, full of wildness, "but you've got heart enough to tame it." School went on. Mr. Grimshaw still paced the aisles with his ruler, still caught Tom daydreaming by the window, but when he did, his scolding was gentler, touched with fondness. "Bailey," he would sigh, "one of these days, you'll surprise me." Tom only smiled. He was learning that life was full of small surprises, most of them hidden in quiet corners. A kind word from a stranger, the smell of rain before dawn, the hush of the harbour at twilight. These moments seemed to whisper that growing up wasn't about leaving childhood behind. It was about carrying it gently forward, One evening, as the sun sank over the sea, Tom climbed the hill above the town. The view stretched wide, the rooftops glowing gold, the masts of ships like slender threads, the river curling away into the horizon. He stood there a long time, breathing in the cool wind. The town that had once felt too small now felt endless, a whole world contained in its simple heartbeats. Below him, he could see children running through the streets, their laughter carrying faintly on the wind. For a moment, it felt like he was watching himself, the boy he used to be, chasing light, chasing wonder, not yet knowing how precious every ordinary day would become. He smiled, not with longing but with gratitude. He wasn't that boy anymore, but he carried him still. The laughter, the mistakes, the courage, the heart. When the first stars appeared, Tom whispered a quiet thank you to the river, to the sea, to Binny, to every moment that had shaped him. The breeze brushed his hair like a kind hand, and the bells from the harbor chimed softly below. He turned toward home, the lanterns glowing in the windows, the smell of supper drifting on the air, and as he walked down the hill, he realized something he had never quite understood before, that wisdom doesn't come all at once, like a sunrise. It comes like the tide, slow, steady, returning again and again until it fills the heart completely. And though he was still young, still foolish in many ways, Tom Bailey felt ready for whatever the next tide would bring. The years in Rivermouth passed quietly after that. The town changed little, though Tom Bailey noticed that each season left its mark a bit deeper on the houses. The trees, the faces of the people he knew. The bakery still smelled of warm bread in the mornings. The docks still echoed with the same laughter and shouts of the sailors. Only Tom was different. He had grown into his shoulders now, his stride steady, his voice carrying the calm of the sea rather than the wild rush of wind. The boy who once chased trouble through orchards and snowstorms now found contentment in the simple pulse of the town, in the rhythm of life that moved slow and sure. Sometimes he would walk the same paths he had taken as a child, down to the river, past the elm tree, along the cemetery road where the haunted house still stood, leaning and silent. It no longer frightened him. It felt like an old story, one he had already lived and outgrown. The fears of youth had softened into memories, and the thrill of mischief had given way to a quiet respect for the small miracles of every day. He often thought of Binny. The ache of his loss had become gentler now, like a scar that no longer hurt but never disappeared. Whenever the evening light fell on the water just so, he imagined his friend's reflection there, smiling in that way only Binny could calm, knowing, forgiving. It comforted him to think that maybe, in some far and kinder place, they were still walking side by side. There were moments when Tom still felt the tug of the sea, the whisper of adventure beyond the horizon. Ships came and went from the harbor, carrying strangers and stories, and sometimes he dreamed of following them, but something always held him close to Rivermouth. Not duty, not fear, but love. Love for the river that had taught him patience, for the sea that had taught him courage, for the people who had taught him kindness. He helped his grandfather in the shop, learned to mend sails, to carve wood, to tell stories that made children laugh. In those stories, he often hid pieces of himself, the foolishness of the boy he had been, the lessons of the storms he had survived, the laughter that time could never take away. The children didn't always understand, but they listened wide-eyed, dreaming their own dreams. And Tom saw in them the same light that once burned in him, the same wild promise of growing up. One evening, as summer gave way to autumn, he climbed again to the hill above the harbor. The sun was setting, turning the water to molten gold. The wind brushed through the grass, cool and soft, He sat there a long time, watching the waves fold and unfold upon themselves, endless and tender. He realized that every story, even a bad boy's, finds its way to gentleness, that every reckless heart, if given time, learns its own rhythm of peace. He smiled at the thought. Below, the town lamps began to glow, one by one, little sparks of warmth against the darkening shore. A bell rang somewhere, slow, familiar, like a heartbeat he had known all his life. Tom closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound settle inside him. He thought of the boy who had once believed that adventure lived in breaking rules. Now he knew the truth, that the truest adventure was learning to care, to lose, to begin again, to keep faith even when the tide went out. The air smelled of the sea and of home. The stars came out, quiet and bright. Tom stood, brushed the dust from his coat, and turned toward the lights of Rivermouth below, toward his grandfather's lamp glowing in the window, toward the laughter drifting faintly from the docks. The river whispered beside him, steady and kind. He smiled and whispered back, "I'm still here." And in that moment, he understood. He had not outgrown Rivermouth. He had become part of it, a thread in its song, a memory in its wind, a story that would be told again and again whenever someone spoke of the boy who was not so bad after all. The night has fallen softly over Rivermouth. The lamps flicker one by one along the quiet streets, and the sea hums low beyond the docks, its waves folding and unfolding like the breath of the earth itself. You can almost see it, the little town resting under a blanket of starlight, its houses sleeping, its windows glowing faintly with the warmth of home. Somewhere, the old elm still stands by the river, its branches whispering secrets to the wind, and if you listen closely, you can still hear the laughter of two boys echoing faintly through the years, their voices carried by the tide, gentle, unhurried, as though time itself paused to remember them. Tom Bailey walks those streets no more, but his story lingers, woven into the hush of the harbor, the creak of the boats, the sigh of the wind that moves through the grass on the hill. He was once a restless spirit, a dreamer, a troublemaker, a boy of wild heart and open eyes, but in the end, he found what every soul seeks, a place that feels like peace. And now, dear listener, let that peace belong to you. Let your breath slow, let your thoughts grow quiet. Like the tide retreating from the shore, you have wandered through memory and mischief, through laughter and storm, through loss and love and homecoming. You have watched a boy grow wise, and in his journey, perhaps you have felt the calm of your own heart returning. The sea outside your window is calm tonight. The stars are kind. You are safe. You are still. You are home. Let the world fade softly now. Let the river's song carry you, as it carried Tom once towards still waters, toward morning light, toward dreams that drift and shimmer like moonlight on the sea. Sleep now. The story has done its work. The boy rests, and so may you. Good night, dreamer. Good night.